Welcome to this Public Safety Communications Task Force Community Listening Session. I'm Barbara Neal. I'm Executive Director of the 911 Board and co-chair of the task force, along with Commissioner Morrison from the Department of Public Safety. I want to say right off the bat that we very much appreciate you taking the time to be here with us tonight. We're looking forward to hearing your feedback and input on the draft system planning report. And your feedback will be very helpful in finalizing that report and helping to determine the path forward. So just a few housekeeping items as we get started here. The meeting is being recorded, so just wanted everybody to be aware of that. It's very helpful when you're asking questions, if you could please state your name. And just so we're all on the same page, the community listening session tonight is focused on gathering feedback from community members, specifically regarding the content of that system design plan working draft. So I'm going to give you, did I skip over the agenda?
Nope. Yeah, it's okay.
I did. Okay.
There you go.
Very sorry about that. Very quickly, we'll give you a task force update, why we're here essentially. Then we will jump into the community feedback discussion and then summarize and wrap things up at the end. And let's go over to the introductions slide again, Bonnie. Okay, so the Public Safety Communications Task Force was created in 2023 by Act 78 and was tasked with the planning and implementation of a reliable, secure, and interoperable statewide public safety communication system. And that system is to be equitably and sustainably financed and available to everyone throughout the state. And it's intended to enhance and build upon previous efforts and initiatives. And there's two things I like to point out at the beginning here. The task force, first of all, has been meeting since June of 2023. We hired some consultants who I will introduce shortly. And with their help, or really through their work, we developed the inventory and assessment document that was required by Act 78, and also this draft system planning report that we're here to talk about tonight. And the things that I want to stress is how much we appreciate and value your input and feedback. We want to hear what is working, what you like about the system planning draft, what you don't like, and what your priorities are and visions are as we move forward. And I want you to know that the task force has had no preconceived notion of what the future structure of the Vermont statewide communications system will ultimately look like. So your input and the input of multiple stakeholders is essential in helping us sort of chart the path forward on this project. So thanks again for being here. I introduced myself and said that Commissioner Morrison is the vice chair of this task force. With us tonight from the task force is Ron Kumitz, who is the chief of the Alburg Fire Department and is representing the Vermont State Firefighters Association. And I can't quite see the whole list, but I believe Michael Wright is also with us. He is the EMT or paramedic representative appointed by the Vermont Ambulance Association. Michael is CEO of the Calex Ambulance Service in the Northeast Kingdom. And then other people on the task force are Paul White, who is the vice chair of this task force, is a retired captain with the state police and was also the chair of the Regional Dispatch Working Group, which was a previous group that did some initial work on the same topics that the task force is tackling. And then we have Jim Mack from the Shelburne PSAP, representing a PSAP overseen by a police department. And the municipal representative is Mike Dunges, who is the mayor of the city of Rutland. And he was appointed by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. If you go to the next slide, I will mention that, or I will introduce the project vendors. So back in 2024, the task force hired a project management team from Televate. Both of them are on the call here tonight. That's Rick Burke and Dom Arcuri. Televate serves as a project manager for the task force and also is essentially our trusted advisor as we go through all this work, making sure the task force is thinking about the right things at the right time and asking the critical questions that need to be asked along the way. And then we also hired Mission Critical Partners as our system planning vendor. Bonnie Maney is here along with several others from Mission Critical. And Bonnie will be running the show here in just a few minutes. But this is the team that was responsible for the development of the system planning draft that we're going to talk about tonight. So thank you all for being here once again. I'm going to, oops, I'm sorry, I forgot about this slide. Let's do one little reset so we all know what we're talking about here. In Vermont, there are different pieces of the emergency communications ecosystem. And I want to make a distinction between the 911 system and the dispatch function. So in Vermont, there is a statewide 911 system that routes 911 calls and text to the correct public safety answering point, or PSAP. You'll hear us refer to it as that. That 911 call is answered in the PSAP by a certified 911 call taker who asks all the appropriate questions and figures out what's going on in accordance with board required protocols, and also provides pre-arrival instructions for police, fire, and medical emergencies while responders are on their way. The 911 call taker is responsible for contacting the dispatcher or the dispatch service to get the responders on the way. And in some cases, that function is done by the same person, but it is separate, handled separately. So dispatch service operates at a local, regional, county, and state level in Vermont. And its work is to focus on the coordinating and supporting of emergency responders during incidents. Dispatchers are responsible for monitoring responder activities, record locations, and provide necessary support during incidents. So I make this distinction here because as you're reviewing the draft system report and engaged in any of these conversations, and as we go along tonight, what we're talking about is the dispatch portion of these two systems. So we're really focused in on how the dispatch function is handled in Vermont. Now, to that end, here's a snapshot of the communication centers in Vermont. The little green dots with the red circle around them are the public safety answering points located at 6 different locations around the state. And then you'll see a number, actually 31, I believe, 25 within the state of Vermont dispatch centers, and then 6 centers outside the state of Vermont that provide dispatch services for responders within the state. So that's just to help us get our bearings on this slide. All right, next slide, Bonnie. I'll hand it over to you for this slide.
Let me get off mute. Good evening, I should say, everybody. And thanks, Barb. So if any of you participated in any of the other community listening sessions prior to the assessment report being done and this being drafted, welcome again. And for those that are new, try to go over a couple of little ground rules that we like to have when we are engaging in the community to discuss feedback. You know, this is a very important topic or y'all wouldn't be here. We do ask you to be present, also to be candid while also being respectful. Everybody's life experiences are different, and so we want to make sure we are respectful in that. And in that way, listen as partners and listen as communities Barb showed that map. There's, a lot of different communities throughout the entire state that are served by these dispatch centers. They have different demographics, different geography, different types of calls for service. But we do ask that you then listen, thinking from that bigger picture type of perspective as well. And, we really want to hear solutions. So if you something you don't like about the report, that's fine. If you have suggestions, though, to give back to us with that criticism, that's even better. And then a save for later, that's what we kind of call a parking lot as well. Jason, one of my colleagues, he's going to be, noting things down that maybe if we get off topic that we might want to come back to after the fact. Jason is also monitoring the chat. And so please feel free, if you don't have a microphone or anything like that, please feel free to put your questions and your responses in chat. That is absolutely welcomed as well. And I will give a little heads up again, those that have gone through this process with me before, at the end, our last question, we will be going around the room and we'll ask you to come off of mute to be able to share any last final thoughts. So just keep that in mind. All right. And here we go. This is the meat of tonight in our discussion. And we're going to start big picture first. We're going to talk about your first impressions, what you liked, what you didn't, as just when you first picked it up and you read it. And it's a hefty document. What were your first impressions of the document? I know some of you are public safety on here as well, but thinking of it as a citizen, and those of you that are community members that may not ever have any public safety background, we want to make sure that it may be technical, but that is a easy read in some senses, of course. I'm going to open up the floor. Who wants to share their thoughts first? And again, chat is fine as well. Anybody want to take a go? Patricia, thank you for
Yes,
stepping
my
up.
name is Patricia. My name is Patricia Bennett, and I used to be a dispatcher and 911 operator in Derby until the state closed down my office.
Mm-hmm.
My first impression of the draft is it seems like it wants to go to less and less buildings, but have everyone in one central dispatching area. And there's a lot of costs to upgrading systems. I don't know the whole electronic piece whatsoever. I was behind the microphone talking and dispatching out services. I still have major concerns for the fact that if you keep shrinking where the centers are located, you're going to not know the people that you're dispatching for.
Okay.
I understand the cost savings, and my impression of you want to save cost, you want to streamline. When I was reading about the training, we had a training process in there. Liz Tracy came up with that, and when I was a dispatcher, we had specific training that we had to do and document, and it was unified. So when I'm seeing that it's not unified, they did have one. I don't know what happened to that. And it was a very comprehensive training. And then we did the 911 training while we were becoming dispatchers. So I don't know where that whole training process went. Okay. So I'm just concerned as a citizen, especially living in the Northeast Kingdom, we don't have enough cell coverage. We don't have enough the geographic area that's covered and having to be known. If your technology goes down and people are dispatching from a totally different area
Mhm.
that have never been to the Northeast Kingdom, that's going to be a
Okay.
problem. And that's where I see
Okay.
that there's a problem with my first impression. And I'm sure there's
Right.
others that want to speak, but that's, I this concerns me, that the shrinking into one, it sounds like going into one or two specific buildings and then dispatching for the whole entire state. And I
Right.
just don't, I don't think that's a safe way to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I will say this is a document of options, right? Almost in a menu of sorts to be able to help decision makers make informed decisions. So we explored, if you looked at the document, there's pros and cons to each of the different options. And, so not necessarily meaning that the option on the far right is the route that would want to be, they would want to go, but to provide those options and so they can help make informed decisions better. And I think, Patricia, again, thank you so much for stepping up with that. Kim Cheney.
Thank you. One thing I'd like to know is if there are any serious catastrophic failures of communication, of people demanding or just calling for help. I think the person having a stroke in a rural community, surely there must be incidents where there's failures to deliver help. And this report makes no mention that there's anything that we should worry about, just other than complexity.
Okay. No,
The
I
second
appreciate
comment
that.
is the executive summary should be written addressed to laymen. This report isn't going anywhere except the legislature. And my guess is 7 people will read it and 3 of them will read the whole thing. It's a complex subject, but unless you have a executive summary that a layperson can pick up and understand what's going on, I had proposed earlier to Jen, who I respect and I think gave me a thoughtful response, that I think the way to start this thing is, Aunt Sally broke her leg in pick some rural community. And this is what happened next.
Right.
And we talk about CAD systems, but we don't say what they are. We don't say that some people have to do handwritten or repeat orders and they get garbled and they get messed up.
Right.
I would like to see an executive summary that tells me more than we have a chaotic system. We know that. Vermont is famous for chaotic systems. What we don't know is all the impediments to a service getting to somebody.
Okay.
So I think you got to rewrite your executive summary so that a layperson can understand what's going on and why I care about it.
We really appreciate that. And we have heard that a couple of times, and it's definitely something on our list to do. So thank you for sharing that. And another piece of it, just so that you're aware, that the real life event type thing that you were referencing, that you spoke with Jen about, we actually are developing a couple of graphics that articulate out like a common event. So thank you for that.
The other thing that I personally got involved in this hearing that dispatchers in PSAPs are tearing their hair out because it's such a complicated job
Mhm.
and the office hours are terrible and they're
They are.
you got to tell these stories.
Yes,
That's
I agreed.
that's why we need to make a change. And we're not going to
Thank you.
build some mega system.
No,
We don't have time or money to do it.
understood.
So
Thank you. Appreciate
my
that.
views. Thank you for
Absolutely.
listening.
Judith, first impressions, and we are going to dig deeper into each of these. So, what do you think, Judith?
First of all, thank you for opening this up for public comment. I really appreciate it. It's so important. I just, and I know people, we have to be fiscally responsible, and to piggyback on what both previous commenters said, I live in Canaan, Vermont, which was part of the Derby dispatch area and now has been rerouted. And I totally get that. And but one of the things that we are experiencing, I can think of two very specific situations in our area. We are 8 miles away from the New Hampshire hospital, but
Mhm.
on at least 2 separate occasions, one was a senior citizen, one was a law enforcement officer, trying to get through, and dispatch was not recognizing that we were this close to New Hampshire resources, so kept trying to reroute to Vermont resources, which were over an hour away.
Mm.
And so to the point where people have had to hang up and drive people or call other people or call, like, and at these times of acute trauma, that's not, people aren't always thinking clearly and frustrated. Like I said, the law enforcement person just said, just hang up, we'll just drive ours, like,
Mhm.
so I'm wondering about if we have to, no matter what the dispatch situations are, increased awareness of the resources in our area, even if it means crossing into New Hampshire and not just looking at Vermont resources and communication, making sure dispatch trainers, people are trained about that.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you for that observation. Yeah, brought to mind closest unit response, right? Regardless
Yeah,
of where you're
exactly.
at. Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I do have to leave, but I appreciate it, and I'll drop it in the chat as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Rich, did you just have a comment?
Well, yes. Richard Doolin, I'm an EMD for the town of Brookfield. So I agree and support everything that everybody has said at this point as the public comment. The way I look at a lot of this is it's like owning a small shop versus a shop as a grocery store or convenience store, and then owning a large, huge place where nobody knows anybody. The
Mm-hmm.
small places know their community, know what's happening, know who frequent flyers are, know some back history while they're trying to dispatch the right service to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And another huge concern is, I believe the first person had mentioned that they worked as a 911 dispatcher, and that office closed, and they don't do that job anymore. Now, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what the rate of pay is. I don't know any of that, but I do know that if somebody loves doing what they're doing and it's easy drive for them to go do that, they're going to do that. But if they close the office and offer a job much further away for the same rate of pay, they're not going to be able to keep that job.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to lose, people that are heavily trained and passionate
Right.
about their job and what they do. So I think it's, to make something smaller but bigger is
Mm-hmm.
probably not the best answer. And also, last thing is, we have been being trained for major power outages due to ice storms because of the
Mm-hmm.
2 degrees difference. So, we saw this in Florida, I think it was, when the hurricane came in, they staged hundreds and hundreds of beds for volunteers in a stadium, and it got wiped out.
Mm-hmm.
They had too many resources in one place. So we need to think about that as well.
Yes. And thank you for that, Rich. I think that's one of the things that we're constantly trying to address too is the redundancy, resiliency. And when we did make comments about strategic reduction, one of the options is looking at it geographically, just to speak directly to, so people may be closer enough that they could still not worry about like longer travel distances to work and things like that. So trying to take those things into consideration. Jason, you say we have some comments?
Yes, so first, Joshua Kurtlink says, thank you, Patricia. Your concern is one that is shared by first responders. If dispatch gets further removed from the frontline workers responding to the call, then they no longer know the individuals that they are dispatching for, nor the residents calling in for help. This could prove dangerous for the personnel responding. Additionally, with fewer dispatch centers, that means less people watching over more and more responders. Can they effectively monitor multiple Chittenden County responses at the same time and keep responders safe, catch a firefighter mayday, etc.? The next chat, and I'm not sure which individual this person was responding to, but Patricia Bennett says that's a huge example of local knowledge and knowing your resources and where to get the assistance needed in the most timely fashion. And Judith, right before she logged off, she said, can't stay on, but wanted to help raise awareness about their area in Canaan. Several of our community members have experienced some disconnect when reaching out to dispatch centers in emergency situations. Looks like that's a repeat of what she actually said. So we can move to the next one. Patricia Bennett also said, I loved my job. I didn't wake up one day and not want to go to work. I was going to retire from there. I felt like I made a difference. I didn't have an option. The powers that be said, well, move to Burlington and dispatch there. That was the response I received. We learned of the closing in the governor's address of 2015. They didn't have the decency to even tell we were being closed. Our dispatch center had the highest retention rate, lowest overtime, and we were closed. And Steve Locke says, all over the country, regional communications work. This is not unique.
Thank you for all of those, Jason, and so everybody can get an idea of what's taking place on chat as well if they don't have access. Sean, I see you. If you could just give me 1 second, I do want to kind of continue to move forward here. Folks, you all have kind of been jumping in on some of this already, what you liked, what you didn't, where are the gaps. So that's great. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I did just pause here for a second. And Sean, did you want to share?
Yeah, just briefly. Sean McCrae. I am a law enforcement officer in Royalton, used to dispatch as well for 3 years. I'll just echo what everyone else said about, the importance of small town communities, knowing who you're dispatching, knowing the area, and frequent players, I guess. Probably the thing that I liked most about the document was trying to get to a better point in unifying communications and whatnot. I know where I work at right now, we use a different dispatch software than state police does. We're also on digital. Agencies that work in the same towns or near each other might not have each other's frequencies plugged in or even be able to listen in. So just as a point of officer safety, that form of unification would be top tier.
Got you. Like that. Thank you. Kim, did you have another comment or is your hand just still up? Okay, you're muted if you're speaking. All right, let's.
Yeah.
Oh, did you still have another comment? Or was your hand just
Yes.
still up?
My overall comment is this is a human document about real people with real problems. It's not a technological document. So the end process is to convince people to spend money they don't have to improve a service. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just re-emphasizing what I wanted to say before, that this is
Okay.
a human document.
Okay, I really appreciate that. I like that perspective. Okay, so to break the document down, we kind of looked at that overview, but to kind of dig into some sections a little bit, and this is probably again from a community member perspective. If you're not familiar with public safety, you know, this does get a little bit more technical, and I think there are the three main sections and then a bunch of appendices, kind of taking the same approach and looking first at the executive summary. And I think, Kim, what you already said about it being simplifying the executive summary for the lay, the lay person, the community member, is definitely is definitely a valid point, something we've heard a couple of times, at least a couple of times. So we're going to work on that. Is there anything else besides simplification of the executive summary that anybody would provide to us as feedback in a way to improve it? Yeah, live examples. Anything else? Oh. Okay. See, if nothing on the executive summary, and if you don't think of something right now, or you're sitting later, you know, doing chores around the house or whatever, and I thought of that. At the very end, we do have a link to where the document resides, and that has an online form that you can submit comments. And those comments are going to be open up till March 28th. And there's also an email address on that last slide too that you'll be able to share comments that way as well. So, but we do want this to be engaging and interactive, so please don't hold back. The methodology piece is, we do realize too that there is a little bit missing. There's this other document that Barb mentioned that has some additional content about assumptions that we had to make when you're talking about 37 different communication centers. There's some content about the methodology in the inventory document that we want to bring in to help kind of lay some groundwork and framework a little bit better for the next section. Is there anything that anybody can share about that? Maybe you've looked at the methodology and said, I don't understand how you got from A to B, and that could help us improve that explanation. Yes, Joshua.
Hey, so I guess, and it may have been in there somewhere and I missed it, and for that I apologize. But as we talk methodology, as we look at a state that has population centers such as Vermont and geographic areas such as Vermont, is there a established ratio, a system best practice that helps design how many of these dispatch centers are adequate for our state versus arbitrarily assigning it based on how much money we can save or spend, something like that?
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, or a question actually. It's really based on the number of people that you need to manage the calls for service, and and the dispatch, so activity based. And there's a number of incidents that is typically ideal, if you will, optimal for a dispatcher, somebody that's dispatching police, fire, and EMS personnel to handle at one time. There's also only, so many calls that a call taker can answer in an hour. And there are ratios that they call busy time, that numbers like 83% of their time, any busier than that, and that's not productive. So there are these numbers. How that goes into how many dispatch centers you should have. There are places in the country that have one dispatch center per county, one 911 center, one PSAP per county. There are ones that have two because they have a primary and a backup. There are others in, let's see, Minnesota has one per county. Illinois says two per county, and that goes by population too. They can't have any more than two per county if you have a population of 25,000 or less. And then there's a county in South Florida that, Palm Beach County, they have 13. But their population is double of what Vermont has. You have 642,000. Palm Beach County, Florida has over 1 million. It's the largest county in the state. So it varies. What we try to look at a lot is reducing or eliminating the number of call transfers, rather than the number of dispatch centers, kind of primarily. So when we looked at what this was, and there's 6 PSAPs now, this, and so we don't want to, lose any of those PSAPs. I think 6 is a good number, we think, from the call volume. But you also have rural areas like everybody is talking about. So we need to take that into consideration as well. But so it's not a 1 + 2 = 3. There's a lot of variables that we have to look at. And I don't know if that answers any of your question, Josh, or if I just made it muddier.
No, that helped. Thank you.
You're welcome. Patricia.
Yeah, I guess that kind of brought to mind, because when we were closed, they didn't think we had very many calls. Like the PSAP itself didn't take a lot of calls. But what happened is because of the knowledge and the experience of the dispatchers that were working, we could answer the public's question and not have to enter a case. So that a trooper would have to deal with someone from the public and answer, when's something happening, or I have an RFA, what do I need to go now? Is, can I do this or can I not do that? And that, I think, we actually shot ourselves in the foot, because we were experienced enough, we knew the information enough, the people in our community, Orleans, Essex, Caledonia, all the way down to Bradford, when we answered questions, they knew we had the knowledge.
Sure.
So we didn't, I guess what I'm asking is this taking into account the knowledge of the dispatchers when they don't have to enter a case? Because the call volumes went up, I believe, over 1,000 when they got transferred to Williston.
Right.
But that's because we didn't enter cases, because we answered the questions and we took the weight off the troopers so that they could actually do more, focus on the more serious issues at hand. So does this take into account of that? Like the
right, I think that's a great question. I think when we talk about the next section, like 3.1, which is, or 3.1 or 3.2, it talks about policy and procedure and standardization in that. And you mentioned earlier about the training program and things like that. And a lot of that, I think, is where we look at that part of it in the policy and procedure, that operational element, and how do you make that efficient so that more people have access to that knowledge as well. So definitely an element for sure. All right, thank you. Okay. Let's see. So thank you for that feedback. Appreciate that. And that gives us some things that we need to build up that a little bit. So section 3 is where most of like all the options, reside. But before we could get to that, all the different types of regionalization, we have this section on what we call organic and inorganic approaches to regionalization. And as we walk through the next 3 sections, you'll see we've broken that down into 3 areas: policies and operations, technology, and then physical regionalization, which most people refer to as consolidation. But we really try and get folks to look at this from organic way of people coming together. And you heard me a little bit ago talk about which was it, Illinois and Missouri or Minnesota as well. Now, those were both considered inorganic approaches to regionalization. There is state legislation that says if you are a county in Illinois, if you're a county of 25,000 people or less, you can only have 2 PSAPs. And in Minnesota, there was state legislation that said you will only have 1 PSAP per county, and it's going to be run by the sheriff's office. And so those are inorganic because they're the result of legislation. The example that I gave down in South Florida, in Palm Beach County, that has 13, which still sounds like a lot. They started out with 24. And over the years, they've come together and they have organically, through cooperation and collaboration, reduced the number of PSAPs in dispatch centers. So then actually they don't have just dispatch centers. They have everything that they have is all PSAPs. So that's what we mean by organic and inorganic. And we really encourage the organic approaches, as much as possible in coming together. But it's not all about physically locating into, into one or more PSAPs. There's other ways that you can regionalize as well. So is there any feedback on those pieces, on that piece? The organic and inorganic, did that come across in that content what we were trying to express there? Yeah, and I got Kim and then Steve after that. Kim, you're on mute if you're talking.
If you called me again.
Oh, okay. Your hand is still up, so.
I just tried to take it down, but.
Okay, we can take care of that.
Look, I think this is ultimately organic. That's what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a separate process. It's a question of the legislature and the users and the dispatchers and first responders trying to figure out how they can work with a limited amount of money in a conflicting environment. And I think they can do it, but they need an incentive. You do it our way, and maybe we can slide you 25% of your budget. They'll jump on it.
Ah, got you. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Kim. Steve?
Yeah.
When you're using the term PSAP, so when I think of a PSAP, I'm thinking call answering of 911 calls separately than from dispatch. Is that what you're referencing? When you use the word PSAP, or are you using combined call answer / dispatch?
So, well, well, let's talk about that. That's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up, because so PSAP in Vermont, the PSAPs both intake calls, right? They're the primary answering point, right, for the 911 calls, but they also do have dispatch responsibilities. Whereas then you have, which would be, I guess you guys we call single stage dispatch, and then you also have dispatch or regional dispatch centers as they're called. Some other places call them dispatch only centers, where they don't take in 911 calls, but they receive transfers from those PSAPs with the information to be able to enter and dispatch resources. So I should be referring to them as PSAPs and regional dispatch centers.
Okay, I just think they're two very different things, right? And so if
They
we talk
are.
about, the ability to process a 911, answer a 911 call, determine where that emergency is located, and then getting it to the right, routed to the right organization, you could have a 911 call answering in a single location with a backup, obviously, but then transferring out to as many dispatch centers as you want. So I think there is some confusion about what we're talking about here, and I guess I think what the report is referring to is cutting down on the number of transfers, but keeping the same number of answering points.
Yes, that would be correct. So cutting down on the transfers as an option, like right as a set of options, strategically reducing the number of regional dispatch centers to be able to reduce the transfers. Now, when you say that though, like I said, you've got operational and policy and operations, and then you have technology, and there's recommendations in technology of things like CAD to CAD, where the call could come into the PSAP, the 911 center, and a call taker there would actually enter it into CAD, and then it would come across on the CAD system. When CAD, sorry, folks, computer aided dispatch is what in 911 and in dispatch and public safety they use to put the calls in and send them over for dispatch. And so the call taker could take that in the PSAP, put it into CAD for the dispatch center, and it would transfer over there all the information without having to physically transfer the phone call. So there's those options as well that can help reduce those call transfers, those physical call transfers. So it's just different sets of options. Did that help answer that question, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I understand. I concur. I just think I'll just say this. I think the report is aggressive, and I like it, but I think it swings for the fence, and perhaps unfortunately, I suspect it won't be achievable. And I wished if there was a way that we could have had some smaller bites of this pie that I think would be more easily to digest amongst the stakeholders and allow us to have some sort of success. Which I think could be happening with 911 call taking and reducing transfers and CAD to CAD and those things. So,
and that's exactly what you're right. That's exactly why it's not necessarily having to go all the way over to the right of those options. The ask of us was to provide an array of options, and then see what makes sense politically now or not now, maybe in the future. What does that strategy look like? So it's not necessarily everything going all the way to the far right of all those options. Sometimes just doing things that first option could be just fine and make a lot of difference. Pardon me. So the policy and operations based regionalization. This is things where, like Patricia was mentioning about training, taking, there's already for the PSAPs, the 911 call takers, are standardized required training from the state. We heard a lot in the initial town halls and community listening sessions, especially the town halls, about the way information is transferred and the way that calls are dispatched and things like that, that there's an ask, if you will, about having some standardized training for all the dispatchers in the state, kind of building upon the good stuff that's happening on the call taker side. So that's one of the areas there. Quality assurance, support for technology support, whether that be for CAD or radio, those kind of things, all fall into this area and can be ways to improve. And on the broader sense, that can be something that can happen more statewide. Any thoughts on policy and procedures that you guys may have liked or didn't like in that section? This can be one of the easiest ways to start to make changes, but it can also be challenging to get everybody to want to agree. Any thoughts? Patricia?
So the one part about standardized training is like we had different agencies that wanted things in a different way. So until you get all the law enforcement, the EMS, fire, all on the same page on how you want it dispatched out. Like we had 13 different fire departments and every one of them wanted different information in a different way. And there was standardized dispatch training. I mean, my manual was by the time I got done training, I had a manual that was at least 150 pages of everything I had to do. But until, and that's where Vermont is actually cool, because every community has their own way of doing something. So I don't think there's ever going to be a time where you're going to have every single emergency responder agency all doing the same exact thing. It's not going to happen because every town has their own way of doing things, their own flavor, so to speak. So if you try to if they try to shove this down every community, they're gonna push back.
Sure.
And unfortunately, with the standardization, you have counties that barely have a volunteer fire department, barely have EMS, or their EMS covers 13 towns. So when you are looking at standardization, it needs to look at the geography that's being covered, the financial resources that those communities have, because they're, as everyone knows, there's different financial resources in every single county. So there was a standardization. I don't know what happened to it. But Liz Tracy did a lot of work. I actually went to an academy for dispatchers, and that went by the wayside. So I don't want to see the reinvention of the wheel when we already had a wheel. We just need to inflate the tube a little bit more, I guess, and not start from scratch. But thank you.
Yeah, and that is something that is a charge in Act 78, is really not, don't break something if it's but I think what we were trying to do, like, enhance things that are already maybe in place. Barb, did you need something before I go to Steve or Rich? Sorry.
Well, I just wanted to quickly address Trisha's comment about Liz Tracy's training program, because I've heard you mention a couple times, Trish, that is still operational and still working, and she runs those courses. I think one of the distinctions is the agencies throughout Vermont are welcome to send people to that training. They're not required to send people to that training. And one of the questions, at least in my mind, is what would be the benefits if, to Vermonters, if there was standardized training required at some level. So I think, but Liz's work is still very much in the mix, and she's been actually contributing to the task force work. So I just wanted to reassure you of that.
Thanks, Barb. Rich?
She's still involved because she's an amazing resource.
Oh, good. Rich?
Yes. So I definitely agree with every community has its own way of responding to things. To standardize something is a good idea. However, it can't be crammed down people's throats. You have to, in my view is, you would have to take the surrender, like Bethel, Randolph Center, and all these other areas, and train the fire chiefs on how to deliver the information, and EMS how to deliver the information and what's being looked for, and then sort of a side note, extra information. But where I'm going with this is any law enforcement officer in the state of Vermont, in the state of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, whichever state they're in, can show up from all the way across the state into an active shooter, into domestic, into a felony stop, and we all know what to do. We all know where to put our car, where to advance forward without communicating. But looking around, okay, law enforcement, and they know what each other are gonna do. So it should be able to work as smoothly as that, because in a big situation that you have multiple towns coming into one town, all these men and women need to understand the procedure of entering into a situation, an incident. So I don't know how to do it, but it's got to be done gently and kindly.
Right. And I think, Rich, that's kind of one of the areas too. If the field can respond in that way, dispatchers should be able to support each other in a similar way when we talk about standardized training and things like that. So thank you. There's a question. My question, and this is from Matt in the chat. My question is, was a countywide system looked at for combined PSAP dispatch? Matt, great question. And it was actually, it was asked in one of the other sessions. And so an option that we are looking at as well of including is what would, from the physical perspective, like not the policy base or the technology, but from a region, like from a physical, like you said, PSAP dispatch, what would that look like from a county perspective instead of using the existing only the existing PSAP? So that is under consideration as well. So thank you. Tega? Hopefully I'm saying that right.
Yeah, hi. Are you able to hear me? I'm in transit right now. So.
We can.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Tega Christie. I'm a volunteer EMT and swiftwater rescue technician, and I just wanted to express that I really hope that part of this conversation, whatever system is decided on, is sustainability and support for dispatchers. Dispatching is a hard job, and I think everyone on this call knows the struggle with staff turnover and staffing those positions. So I really hope that increasing pay and reworking hours to make them more manageable and sustainable, and providing psychological support, EAP, and things like that is a part of this conversation, because whatever system we come up with, the people in the chairs are the ones who make it, and if we're not investing in them and making this a sustainable career path, we're not gonna, our state's gonna suffer. So just wanted to say that. Thank you so much for letting me speak.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And I think that's definitely an aspect of this policy and operations piece here, is looking at when we talk about how many staffing, and there are dispatch centers that have one person on duty at a time. Imagining, them handling an emergency or disaster, on a mass casualty incident all on their own. Even just with two people in a center, that can be overwhelming very, very quickly. So those things are definitely being looked at. Thank you, Tega. Let's see, Rod, you have a comment?
Thank you. My name is Rod West. I own a towing company in Chittenden County. I've been towing for 25 years for the state police. I'm very familiar with operations at the Williston PSAP, and have a lot of respect for the men and women that work up there. Supporting, looking at savings, it's kind of interesting to me here. Many of the dispatchers that are up there, the training process kind of winds up being who's the last person standing. A lot of people start being dispatchers. Very few of them make it into a career. And the ones who can really absorb and handle all the punches all day long, I don't understand it somewhat. I think that the report here, or the draft, I read it today online, which is a little hard versus having it on paper. But getting everybody on an CAD systems that are integrated and have interoperability seems really key to me here. Getting everybody so that police and fire and rescue can work on the same system, and getting all those transfers. And up at the Williston PSAP, there's 911 call takers and there are dispatchers. They happen to be in the same room, and so there are a lot of times when the dispatchers hear what's coming in on 911 in the background, but they definitely, there's always transferring of information going on. And I think that's a real huge key of what you guys are working on and the possibilities going on here.
Yes, it is.
For a long time, when the PSAP started consolidating, and I'm going back a long ways, because it used to be that dispatching was done out of every barracks, because the radio systems were primitive and whatnot. And then they consolidated to 4 PSAPs and down to 2 PSAPs. Well, if somebody in Williston can do radio for somebody in Derby or Canaan, there's really one of the other big keys in the report here that I thought was very significant and important was developing distributed workstations so people can work from wherever, whether it's home, whether you take the admins in the barracks and give them some dispatching abilities, at least, so they can take overflow. I think that's a real big piece that you guys should work on in also getting everybody onto the same CAD system. Putting everybody all together in similar buildings or in a few buildings and having to work on this quality control thing, it seems to me like quality control is going to eat up all the savings that you get from consolidating facilities. So those are my impressions on the report. I'd like to make a pitch. There's nobody on, in your working group from the towing community. We're really the fourth leg sitting out there on the helping on the highway. And I've recently, it seems to work pretty well in local police departments doing their own dispatching and calling and having their records and getting people to answer and being available for calls. It's a lot more complex for the state police statewide. I'm a member of the Towing Association. I get input from there. I'm not an officer or anything. I'm not trying to represent the Towing Association right now. But having gone to regional PSAPs, I think the times of service have increased over the years, and they're not getting the service. The public is inconvenienced in big traffic backups because it's a long time to get a tow truck out there. Troopers are sitting out on the highway in danger. People are the risk of secondary crashes is long, and fire departments are overstressed, sitting around waiting for tow trucks to show up. When it's hard to keep volunteers if they get dragged away from their jobs for an hour or 2 hours at a time for just a simple car accident. So I had been working recently on trying to work with Crosswinds to talk about what could be improved to add towing into the dispatch system. And the other part of it is I get calls frequently. I've had 2 this week of people looking for their cars that they thought were stolen. That's another big piece of dispatcher load. And calling for tow truck drivers is another big piece of dispatcher load. So I think it's really important for you all to add integration with towing companies, whether it's like the active 911 system so that we get heads up at least, or we could be dispatched that way. adding a portal for consumers so they can, instead of having to talk to a dispatcher to get information, they could find their car, and towers could report that they've towed a car and put plates in locations automatically without having to bother the dispatchers.
Sure.
And
Well, Rod, you just kind of tumbled right into the technology and shared systems kind of based regionalization with some of those, because you're right, there are technologies out there that can help integrate and automate some of those, routine tasks of reporting tows and things like that, right? So that's some really good observations and really appreciate that. I know as far as task force, not necessarily participation, but or being on the task force, but the meetings, and Barb will be able to say are open to the public. They welcome people participating in those meetings, and they're at the end. You again with the email and the website, you'll be able to find out when those are, and the time and everything. And I'm sure they would welcome people participating. Krista or Tega, did you have another question? Do you still have your hand up?
No, I did not. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries. Jason, did you have something for me?
Yes, so we have two comments in chat. One from Cassie Lunderville. It says, I'm a dispatcher for an agency that does both New Hampshire and Vermont. In New Hampshire, we have a statewide team that helps each other out when needed. The dispatchers that are members can respond to any agency in the state that asks for help. They were recently, apologize for that, they were recently used in Concord while all their personnel were at a funeral. Perhaps Vermont should look into creating this. And Kim Cheney looks like he's reiterating his comments from earlier.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for putting those in chat as well, Kim. Cassie, I'm assuming you're talking about a telecommunicator emergency response task force. I think that's what you're talking about, and those are great to have in different states and stuff. Yes, TERT, great, thank you. I'm not sure if if Vermont has one. That's something to look at. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other comments on the technology and shared systems base section? There used to be a peer support in Vermont for dispatchers when I was dispatching. Oh, thanks, Patricia. Okay. Anything else on the technology and shared systems? Again, this kind of takes it the broad from the standardization, and those have now kind of more, getting to that technical, a little bit more expensive, a little bit more challenging as far as options sometimes. Some things even that can improve right now. A lot of the majority of the communication centers, the dispatch centers, don't get the telephone number in the address that comes across in a 911 center, right? So a 911 call comes into a PSAP and they transfer that to a communication center, a dispatch center, and that information, even location information where the caller is calling from, doesn't come across. So fixing things like that even can be very helpful. Can go a long way. Any comments, any other comments on the technology element? We've heard a lot about CAT already. Some other ideas on for helping automate some of these things, make them the ability, not user friendly, but streamlined with the use of technology such as the tow information and stuff. Okay, let's keep moving on. Just a quick time check. We've got about 20 minutes left on this, and everybody is being so participatory. Super appreciate it. The physical facilities-based regionalization. This is at tier 1, kind of it's much more complicated. Can take a lot longer to take place. But I will say this is actually kind of, I want to say, there's some of this going on in a way. So there's 4 dispatch centers that do not operate 24/7. So what happens when their dispatcher isn't there. They already have connectivity with the PSAP that answers their calls for off hours work. So, so in a way, right, they're already, when their dispatcher is not on duty, they are consolidating, if you will, into one of the PSAPs. So some of that is already kind of happening, but not 24/7. So on kind of a mini scale. Any other thoughts on the physical? We heard about looking at it county based. We heard about concerns with travel time and staff. When their experience when other places have closed, that they've lost their job. Rich, yes.
So on the consolidation aspect, I didn't see what areas they're looking at possibly putting consolidating facilities. However, we need to look at, like I'm in Orange County. The Orange County Sheriff's Department is sort of inactive right now. But there's, the Sheriff's Department is in that town, but it's difficult to get to during bad weather. So in that, with bad weather, ice storms and all that other stuff, major power outages, as I'm going back into that tabletop, wherever they are, they need to look at flooding, like the EOC floods out in Waterbury, not putting something there, not putting something in, the Orange County area where the Sheriff's Department is, because it's difficult to get to, but finding a location with hopefully a building already there that can be utilized, and then building from there. And again, traveling, people that love their jobs, not putting them out of work, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, good point. The plan as it sits right now is looking at leveraging, leveraging the existing PSAPs, those facilities, and not abandoning those, is what the recommendation was at this point. But if it went to a county approach, then yes, we definitely have to look at what that would look like and what facilities were available. Any other thoughts on the physical element? All right, moving on to the governance piece. Governance is very important, of course, to be able to make sure that there is a coordination across the board, and that people have a voice, and that their concerns for their communities and everything are heard, and that there's an avenue when you talk about funding and oversight and all that kind of thing. So any comments on the governance section? All right, Rich, did you have another comment on that, or was you just a hand still up? No worries. Okay, there's no comments on governance. Funding and cost sharing. There are some agencies right now that, well, if you were dispatched out of one of the state PSAPs, there's not a fee to the agencies or the municipalities that are part of that, but other dispatch centers are charging fees and having some sort of cost sharing with the agencies they're dispatching for. And if you recall, one of the things when Barb mentioned about Act 78 was that there is an equitability aspect to our work and what we're trying to put together. Some of these things are more expensive to put into place, and they do need to be sustainable long term. So, and ways to fund those. So any comments on and suggestions on the funding and cost sharing piece? We did have we did have a funding workshop actually earlier this week, and sort of talking about this piece. Yes, Patricia, go ahead.
So I know that was a big thing when our PSAP got closed. because all the emergency responders were told, well, if you want the Vermont State Police to dispatch for you, this is what it's going to cost. And that went out to everybody. And I think that was one of the part they said they were going to save money by closing Derby because it was costing too much. But there's got to be some sort of formula, because there's counties in Orleans County or towns in Orleans County, they may have 3 fire calls a month, where another town could have 25.
Right.
And that's going to be a huge pull for this project, because you know, if your town only uses the resources 1% of the time and another town uses 25%, yet their ability to pay for that 25% is nowhere to be seen. I don't know how you're going to actually be able to fairly share the cost with everybody, because people are going to not be happy if they're paying a certain amount and another town is paying a certain amount and they're using the resources way more than another town. And I know that sounds really petty, but when you're looking at your town budgets and how you're going to pay for services, that's a huge talking point.
It is. You are correct. Thank you for that, Patricia. Any other thoughts on the funding and cost sharing?
Bonnie in chat, Matt says it should be state funded.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. Tager?
Yeah, sorry, I hope I'm not repeating myself too much, but I just hope when we're looking at these costs and looking at line items for dispatcher pay and support, that we're not looking at level funding them, but at increasing that so that we have careers that are sustainable and are supporting people staying in those roles long term who have those skills.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that very much. Especially in consolidations, it's very important, and there are recommendations usually fall in a best in class, so that the recommendations are looking at if there's a consolidation, what are the best of those benefits, so nobody is in everybody's as whole as possible. So I appreciate that. All right. Let's see, where are we at here? We got a few minutes. The timeline. The timeline is very important here. This is not something that would happen overnight. The timeline that we have in here is, up to 10 years at this point. And so that kind of, again, speaks to the options, and can some things be started, working on sooner, while the more complicated, radio system communications, those kind of things can take a longer amount of time, or if there is a desire to strategically reduce the number of dispatch centers, those things can take time. And so the timeline here is very open. And we're kind of like saying, hey, this is a strategy to build on over the next 10 years or so. So any comments on the timeline? All right. Then I'm going to, I mean, there are several appendices. We won't go into that. Oh, I missed. Patricia, comment?
Yeah, sorry to be so vocal, everyone.
Please.
You're
great.
This was something that I still battle with after 10 years of it being closed. So with timelines, my only concern is if it's if this is like a 10-year timeline, which you were speaking of, after 5 years, in 1 year, technology can change.
Sure.
And I guess, to look at, if you're going to change something, you change it for everyone, so everyone has the same exact stuff if they're able to. And then not by year 8, your technology is already outdated.
Right.
And I know technology updates all the time. I totally get that. But I would hate to see this keep running behind the 8 ball, because it's, oh, well, now we need to update this again, so we can't do this. Oh, well, we can get to this point, but we can't do that now because we have to update this again. And so you're never reaching your goal, because it's a constant fluid motion. And when things get rolled out, and they get rolled out in piecemeal, the last people to get it are like, okay, what? you know, it just, when you're thinking about that, just, you might be great at year 3, but then you're backtracking 4 and 5, and then you got to backtrack years 6 and 7, and just because of the technological advances. Thank you.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. Good observation. Appreciate that. All right. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I think what we can, this right here is going to be probably our most productive at the moment. And this is that last question that I mentioned. And we're gonna go around the room on this. So hopefully everybody, again, if you can't speak, when we get to, if you could just put it in chat, that would be fabulous. But what suggestion or suggestions do you have for the task force to improve the system plan design, or system design plan document? Well, and actually I see Chester, you have your hand raised. So and you actually, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, great. This has nothing to do with the piece that's on the screen right now. We only received the report through a VSP press release on Tuesday afternoon, so we've had limited time to look at it. But one thing that jumped out at me, especially during what's called Sunshine Week, which celebrates keeping governments transparent, were the redactions. And I'm wondering why those are needed when this is a taxpayer financed effort. And tonight is a time for those taxpayers to comment.
Understood. Barb, would you please?
Yeah, sure. So the system planning document and the document I mentioned earlier, the inventory and assessment document, needed to be reviewed for system security information that could put systems at risk if it were released. And I think in the system planning document as well, there was one number that may not have been finalized just yet. So that's my understanding. But especially in the inventory and assessment report, there's information about, the systems that various dispatch agencies are using, their operations details, and things that could put them at risk if the information was made publicly available. So that is a reason that you see some redactions in this document and others in the inventory document. And hopefully that answered the question.
Actually not. What I was looking at was the rating system for a number out of 10. And it seemed as though that was kind of a black box that I don't understand. Why a number would be top secret. I don't know.
That's the one that Barb was just mentioning that is not finalized yet. So as we go through this process, if we learn things on that rating scale, that we would maybe have to go in and adjust the response, because what we had learned before, we've learned something different. We want to make sure that that number is accurate. So that is why it's not ready yet.
Why not simply use the number that you have and mark it as something that's still in progress?
Well, it went through the typical public records review before we finalized it. So I'll have to follow up to see, if there's any flexibility there. I can follow up with you if that would be helpful.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Chester, while I have you, Anything else you can suggest for the task force to improve the document? Even on just your cursory review so far?
I have not had a chance to read it in depth, and
Okay.
I'd like to speak with some of the people in our area in the fire departments, police departments, and ambulance services to see what they think.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Tega, any final comments? Thoughts on improvements?
Yeah, at risk of being redundant, if you all haven't, and I'm sorry I haven't read the full report in depth either yet, but for anyone who hasn't, like, take some time to talk with dispatchers about what they need in order to be sustainable in their work, so that we're not constantly training people and losing them.
All right. Thank you, Tega. Jeffrey Koff. Any suggestions for the task force? Jeffrey, are you there? Can you come off mute? All right, Jeffrey, if you can leave a comment, that would be great. Cassie, any thoughts?
I gave all my thoughts the other evening at the
Oh,
first
that's right.
responder one. Thank you,
Okay.
though.
Yes, thank you. Chris Knox, any suggestions for the task force?
As a state, can you hear me all right?
Sure can.
Can you hear me? Okay. As
Yes,
a state employee, I'll ask my questions offline.
Okay.
But been interesting listening in.
All right, thank you. Maria. Don't have a last name, but Maria, do you have any thoughts for the task force?
I think a suggestion would maybe reaching out to the dispatchers that work across the various agencies throughout Vermont and get their perspective on maybe improvements or areas that they may see needs growth or support in, and how the longevity could be successful with that.
Sure. I will let you know that our team at MCP, our team is all former dispatchers and 911 operators. The team visited all 37 communication centers in the state and did sit with and talk to dispatchers as well. So just so you know that too. Matt, any thoughts for improvement?
Yeah, two things. One, I thought maybe again, I think as the gentleman said earlier that I haven't really had much time to really read it thoroughly. I did skim it though. Regards to the statistical breakdown, I didn't really see anything about the average time it takes from a PSAP to transfer a call to regional dispatch, and then how long from there it takes to dispatch the appropriate resource. I think that in some parts of the state, critical time is probably being wasted for things like cardiac arrests, fires, things that really matter in terms of following the gold standard the rest of the country is. And so I didn't really see that, other areas of the state that are faster than other parts. And then the second thing was, when you listed all the dispatch centers, I didn't see anything for Able in Burlington, which is I'm sure it's a very large percentage of calls for Vermont.
Barb, can you field that?
I didn't catch the name. What was the name you said?
Oh, Able Dispatch for the city of Burlington.
Well, for this work, we Mission Critical worked with each individual dispatch center, including the Burlington Dispatch Center. I've not heard the name Able before, though. So is it Burlington Dispatch Services?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, they had a site visit and talked to at least some of the people there. Correct, Bonnie?
Yep, absolutely. All right.
Okay,
Yes.
because the way the way it was listed out, it made it sound like Burlington wasn't going to be included in the overall this new statewide dispatching system. That's what my question was, I guess.
Okay, so you're speaking about the options for the physical regionalization.
Right, like if Burlington wanted to stay as its own individual dispatch.
Okay.
Yeah, there is so there is some language in there too about agencies that may want to opt of not, if that were the decision to try and reduce the number of dispatch centers, if what an agency would have to do if they wanted to remain independent. So that, is an option as well. But the recommendation based on that is that they would still need to meet any state standards and have, connectivity and things like that. I want to mention really quick, and I know we are at time and I want to still get through this, but I appreciate your comment on the amount of time for call transfers, because I don't know that we actually put in the time, which is actually 90 seconds for a call transfer of information, not just the technology. And when you multiply that by the 78,000-ish calls that are transferred a year, that is almost 1,900 hours. That is over 1,900 hours of time it takes to transfer those calls from those 6 PSAPs to the 31 dispatch. Well, the 31 dispatch centers, yeah. So,
wow.
but so we need to make sure that, to your point, we need to make sure that's articulated, those time, that time that's in there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. Patricia, any last comments?
Is the task force also looking at like cell phone coverage? The drop calls that happen in the Northeast Kingdom because there's no cell coverage, and then where they're saying that the 911 operator can't get back in touch with the person, or the Annie Alley information isn't transferred because the call got dropped, so we don't know if services are going out. Is that being addressed, the connectivity of people actually being able to contact the system to get assistance?
Scott, do you want to?
So yeah, I'll take that. So yes, we did look at cellular coverage. We leveraged some drive testing that had been done. The folks at DPS had done just a couple of years ago along the highways to see that. The problem with cellular coverage is all those companies are private companies, and forcing them to expand their coverage footprint without paying for them is extremely difficult. You can put pressure on them, but and it is something that the state has been working towards, working with those carriers, but it's quite frankly, it's more of a negotiation than it is anything else, because like I said, they have they're for-profit companies. They have a business case to make. So as much as we would like to see them expand their network footprint just for the greater good, they are beholden to their business cases. So we did look at it. It's certainly a part of it. Everybody, it's a problem across the country in rural areas. It really is. There are some options. The Vermont Broadband Board is getting money from the the federal BEAD program to expand high-speed broadband to unserved and underserved areas. Part of that component is working with those cellular carriers to help them increase their coverage, but it's not something that anybody in government can just go to Verizon or AT&T or anybody and say, "Hey, I need you to put coverage here, and I need it now." You have to really try and work with them. But cell coverage is not great, especially in the rural areas of Vermont.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Patricia. Rod, any thoughts for the task force on improving the document?
Thanks. I'm still here. As I said before, it's a pretty complex read, trying to get through it, especially not on a piece of paper, and that kind of reduces accessibility. I'm kind of with Kim, is that the summary needs to be a little bit easier for busy legislators to have time to read it. The body of it, you are very politic in seeming like trying not to ruffle feathers by not having conclusions in each section. And that left the conclusion of, down at the very bottom of the report. It really isn't mentioned in the executive summary as to what you're recommending. I think that's a little bit of a loss. And I'm a little lost on where's the value. We talk about some about value to consumers or users or people calling 911, and it doesn't carry through to me how that's really addressed, or where the deficiencies are really hurting people today, and trying to quantify that. But anyway, thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I think that is everybody on the list. Thank you guys so much. And again, I know we are at a few minutes over time, so appreciate you guys hanging out. Our next steps, we'll be taking and reviewing the feedback provided today, any feedback submitted online for use to further the conversation with the legislature, sorry, and the online feedback will be being accepted through March 28th. And Barb, I will toss it back over to you to close us out.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bonnie. And thanks everybody for being here tonight. I thought it was a really good discussion. I learned a few new things along the way. We do appreciate all your input. As Bonnie said, it's going to be given careful review as we move forward through the comment period, which again is through March 28th. I encourage you to check the webpage for the task force at the Department of Public Safety website. You will find us there. There's regular stakeholder updates that are presented there. And certainly encourage you to come to any of the task force regular meetings. They happen generally every 2 weeks. The next meeting is on next Wednesday, actually, the 26th at 11:15. And you can find, all the old meeting recordings and minutes, the agenda for the upcoming meeting on this website as well. And certainly, even beyond the comment period, if you have things that you want the task force to know, reach out to any of us or through the email that you see on the screen. And again, thank you very much for being here. Bonnie, does anybody have anything else, or are we set to go?
I think we're good to go. Just thank you guys for hanging out for, past the time. Again, we know this is a really super important topic, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.